Rockets and Knicks were in Game 5 when OJ started that fateful drive. His four-way hazard lights were blinking, and no one knew what the juice was thinking.
I've been to Reno, Chicago, Fargo, Minnesota, Buffalo, Toronto, Winslow, Sarasota, Wichita, Tulsa, Ottawa, Oklahoma, Tampa, Panama, Mattawa, La Paloma, Bangor, Baltimore, Salvador, Amarillo, Tocopilla, Barranquilla, and Padilla. I'm a killer. I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere, man. Crossed the desert bare, man. I breathe the mountain air, man. Of travel I've had my share, man. I've been everywhere.
This is Oversight Live, your advocate for good governance. We're putting the site back in. Oversight. Here's the watcher on the wall, your host, Ben Carpenter.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Oversight Live. What is Oversight Live? Well, it's your road to Juneau until one can be built. For those in Alaska, we understand. For those outside Alaska, you know, you don't know, I guess, that maybe that Juneau is down in the Panhandle and you can only get to it by plane or by ferry. So it's cost prohibitive for most Alaskans to go and provide oversight and see what's going on in their legislature and other government offices for that matter. So I've got 6 years in prior legislative service, served in the House for 6 years, and I am going to bring you, the legislature, right into your home. There's too much going on every single day to bring everything, so I will use my best judgment and bring you what I think is pertinent, and you'll have the opportunity to ask questions if you're not sure what's going on, because sometimes legislative service is a foreign language of sorts. So if you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, or X, you can chat right in your window, and I'll get your chat, get your questions, get your feedback, and I'll address it in real time right on the air. If you're watching the recording, you can send me an email at producer@oversightlive.com. That's producer@oversightlive.com. And I'll do my best to answer your question by email. If it's really good questions, guys, I'm going to use it on air here and to edify others. Because if you've got the question, then likely somebody else has got the same question. So, and we're going to try to have fun. Because what sense would it be talking about politics and government in general if you're not trying to have fun? Right? All right. Well, today, interesting. Welcome Monday. Had to reboot my computer and my whole system here. For some reason, my cameras weren't working, and anyway, just gremlins. Got started a little bit late here. Thanks for joining in, and we're going to get going. Today we had Senate Resources, as we've been following along with the Gasline bill in the House and the Senate. Senate Resources adopted another committee substitute. So we're going to tonight hear about the explanation of changes and what they did with their committee substitute before they're probably getting prepared to send it out. And next committee goes to Senate Finance. And obviously this is a rush to get it done if it's going to get done. That meeting happened at 3:30 p.m. And, I think it was probably 5 p.m. Governor Dunleavy came on with a Facebook Live press conference, and he had some comments to say about the press or about the gas line. And I think we're going to lead off with that today because there's a couple tidbits there that are really, really important. Confirm some things that I've been thinking. So we're going to jump to Governor Dunleavy's press conference first, and then we will jump over to the legislature to understand what's going on with Senate Finance, because it's important. Okay, let's bring up Governor Dunleavy here.
What I talk about, the big item on the agenda, I think, for Alaskans is energy. and energy with regard to this gas line. I think there's no denying that this gas line has more momentum behind it now than it ever has before. Everyone from the President of the United States to his staff, to his secretaries, here in Alaska, our bases, our own utilities, as Cook Inlet continues to diminish in its ability to supply gas to Alaskans. And then we look at what's happening in the Persian Gulf. And if you're following the Persian Gulf, I, like many people, don't care for wars, and I, like many people, don't care to see innocent people get injured or killed. I mean, that should be a given. The war in the Persian Gulf obviously has really changed the energy dynamics throughout the world, and probably will for some time. Some think maybe permanently. Much of the world's gas and oil. Let me rephrase that. A lot of the world's gas and oil comes from the Persian Gulf. There's some of your largest producers in the world are located there. It's Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, United Arab Emirates. When it comes to gas, Qatar is one of the largest producers on the planet. And for decades and decades and decades, this oil and gas flowed from the Persian Gulf with little issue. I mean, in the 70s, we had the Arab oil embargoes because of the war that was happening there between several Middle Eastern countries and Israel. But after that, it was kind of, quote, smooth sailing for a while until February. There's many that believe that it's never going to return back to what it was, that the longer this conflict goes on, and a lot of this is in the hands of Iran to mitigate, but as long as this conflict goes on, the longer this conflict goes on, the worse it's going to get for energy, an energy-focused or energy-centric Persian Gulf. And you got to remember, it's not just energy, it's aluminum, it's fertilizer, it's petrochemicals, it's a lot of things. So what's the point in bringing up the Persian Gulf? When it comes to Alaska, this is really an Alaska advantage at this point, and to our Asian allies it is, because our proximity to Asia, 8 days to Tokyo, 8 or 9 days to Tokyo and Seoul, South Korea, but uncontested waters is really the big thing. And so where for decades our Asian allies and others were looking to the Persian Gulf to get really, relatively speaking, cheap gas, cheap oil, and to diversify their portfolios, there was always this looking over the shoulder that what happens? What if the Persian Gulf goes off the rails? Well, it has. And when people look at it, they realize that the potential to go off the rails was always there because of just the mixture in that part of the world in terms of philosophies, doctrine, religion, etc. And so, again, we don't know when this is going to end. But what do we have going on for Alaska right now? You have a whole host of things coming together at this moment. And it's this moment. It's not going to last forever, and that's the point I want to make. Alaska's moment is a moment. It's not an eternity. And right now in Juneau, we are working on, many legislators are working on getting a bill passed that would modify our very high property tax law that I think never really contemplated a project of this magnitude. And as a result of that, you have a number of legislators that are working very hard. You have some that are skeptical as to whether this project will ever happen. But modifying this property tax, converting it into a PILT, which is a plan in lieu of taxes, in which the local communities, the local boroughs, the state, and the private concern, Glenfarne, can come together around an agreement that would allow this to become financeable. In other words, we want to be as competitive as possible with the rest of the country and the rest of the world. So people are asking, well, Dunleavy, what's this PILT all about? Why do we need it? Why is it necessary? Why is it so important? Because it is crucial to the financing of this project. For example, if anyone can envision a map of North America, Alaska's way up on top of the world. You go down south and you have Texas on the Gulf. Texas has a lot of gas. Well, what Texas also has that we don't have are interstates, large permanent labor pools. The pipe itself is either made or shipped in, very close to where Texas is. And so if you were to compare the price and the cost of building an 800-mile pipeline in Alaska versus an 800-mile pipeline in Texas, the cost is nearly half as much in Texas. That makes that more attractive to investors. When you think about us building a pipeline this far north, you got to ship equipment up, you have to ship pipe up. You have to use every available worker in Alaska, and I'm going to talk about that in more detail in just a moment, because I think it's important for our unions and others to understand that this will be a job creator like no other. This project, in many respects, will be bigger than the Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline. But going back to this PILT, we have to make it economical. There's a lot of movement now in the energy world across the world. Many of our Asian allies and others are looking, where are we going to get energy on a long-term secure basis? Well, Alaska's secure. There's no doubt about it. But Alaska also costs more. So what this PILT is going to do is help us reduce the cost of financing so we can be competitive with other projects that are now being financed. If we don't do that, if we continue to pretend that Alaska is right next to Texas, that it's as cheap as Texas, that it's as easy to build as Texas, that it doesn't have a wilderness to put a pipeline through, that it doesn't have cold, long winters, that the whole cost structure is equal to Texas, if we keep fooling ourselves into believing that, we may not get this pipeline done. However, as I mentioned earlier, the proximity of Alaska to Asia and the fact that we've demonstrated we can do big projects. We were the pioneers in LNG export to Japan starting in the late 60s on planet Earth, not just in North America. We were the first period that created an operation that sent gas consistently for 50 years to Japan. We are the home of the Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline, built in the 70s with 70s technology that is still carrying oil through our, from the North Slope to our consumers worldwide. And so we can do it. We've shown we can build it, but we're in a very, very competitive world right now. And so this PILT is crucial. Whether it's Glen Farm, whether it's any other outfit that does gas and builds gas pipelines and operates gas pipeline, it's really about us. We need to revisit this, in which the legislature is, and I'm grateful for that, and I'm thankful for that. But we got about 3 weeks left in the session. And as you know, things go oftentimes in a legislature, not just ours, we're in Congress, any elective body, people want to try to make it a perfect bill, and that's not going to happen. Rarely does happen, because when you have 60 individuals trying to decide what a bill is going to look like, it's not always going to look like the bill that the guy next to them wanted to look like. But the key is we have to make this bill financeable and passable. This bill has got to be, we got to be able to construct a bill that doesn't tax investors just on property that sits there, which the current property tax would do, as opposed to when gas is flowing. So by making this, again, this property tax bill into a PILT, turning this into a PILT and making it more competitive, we have a real opportunity to make it financeable. And if we have that opportunity to make it financeable, which I think we will with the changes to the PILT, we got a gas line. Why do I say that? The demand for gas worldwide was spiking before the Persian Gulf War. Now they're going to be looking for places that are secure. And this is what this PILT does. And so we have 3 weeks left. Some in the legislature said there's not enough time, but they've been saying that back in January. Some in the legislature say we can do this. We can make this happen. But I can tell you this, the window is not going to stay open for Alaska forever. The Asian allies and others are looking for gas worldwide. They're looking for gas everywhere. They're looking for gas in which they could be assured they're going to get the gas. This PILT is passed. That's one huge step forward for Alaska to confirm that Alaska can assure we can get a pipeline built and be shipping gas overseas. Now, we're going to talk here in a moment about what's happening in the state of Alaska. And this is really, to me, what's fascinating. For those that are arguing that maybe we need to take more time on this PILT or this project may not work, what is their alternative? What's the alternative to get energy to Alaska? We're running out of gas. Really, the only viable alternative we have right now is to import gas. And once you start importing gas on a large scale over the long term, that then becomes your only option. But there's a problem with that. You might go from $10 a unit gas in the lower 48 or Canada quickly to $12, $14, $15, $16, $18 gas. And what does that mean? You're looking at 35 to 45 cents a kilowatt hour, 5 to 10 years from now on the rail belt, especially in places like Fairbanks, Alaska, that makes the state uncompetitive. It makes it non-competitive for people that want to move here. It's going to really damper a business environment for businesses to move here. And you're probably going to see an outflow of people. And people will say, well, Dunleavy, you're painting a grim picture. I'm painting reality. We are running out of gas right out the window here in Cook Inlet. We've known this since at least the mid-2000s. We had brownout commercials with the mayors in 2010. We've been talking about this for years, and now we have an opportunity. So what would this gas line produce besides 3.2 billion cubic feet per day or 20 million tons of gas per day? It would produce an amazing amount of ancillary benefits. Cheap long-term gas in the mid-teens, most likely for Alaska. Our gas is not on Henry Hub, so we could have long-term stable contracts. You're going to attract businesses here like data farms, reopen the fertilizer plant, other types of potential petrochemical businesses here, especially what's happening in the Gulf. This is a safe, calm part of the world right now, here in the North Pacific in Alaska. You're going to create thousands and thousands and thousands of good-paying jobs. You're going to lower the price of energy for schools, for hospitals, for institutions that are here already. The list goes on that you're going to be able to collect royalties and severance tax for our treasury to the tune of $900 to maybe $1 billion that we don't have now. But if we don't have a gas line, you've got none of those things. As a matter of fact, by some calculations, without a gas line and importing gas, the legislature is going to have to work on an urban power cost equalization program in the tune of $2 to $5 billion to build renewables and batteries and wind and solar and to import gas. This
is the first time that I've heard Governor Dunleavy talking about that particular concept. I haven't heard any other legislators talk about it, but I'm not down in Juneau right at the moment. So this is the first that I'm hearing of this concept of a power cost equalization or PCE for urban that is focused on renewables. But it is interesting that the renewables conversation is coming up in a larger conversation about a gas pipeline, right? Because some people want the alternative, which is this renewables push.
Not a recipe for a growing state. That's not a recipe for a growing economy. That's a disaster. So we have this one moment in time. If we can get the legislature to come together for the people of Alaska, for the state of Alaska, you could have a gas line that creates thousands of jobs, that creates royalty and severance tax for the Treasury, that would not necessitate the legislature creating an urban PCE for Anchorage and Fairbanks and the Mat-Su and the Kenai, that could open up the Agrium plant in Kenai, creating more fertilizer, more jobs. Data farms could come here. Our school utility rates would drop dramatically. Our hospital utility rates would drop dramatically. So if you were to say to me, Dunleavy, what's the most important thing that can happen in this session? It's this PILT, by far, bar none. This would be the largest project in Alaska history, probably the largest in the Arctic, in the Pacific. The impacts on Alaska would be almost immeasurable, going out decades and decades and decades. And we are this close to securing this with this PILT. So I asked the legislature to continue to work as hard as possible over the next 3 weeks to get this, come to agreement on this PILT so we can take this, Len Farn can take it to Wall Street, finance this project, order pipe, sign contracts, and get things going. But it's going to be crucial in order for us to finance this project. And so that's the main part of this discussion. But at this point, I want to talk about PCE for a moment, because there was just an interesting decision made by the RCA, Regulatory Commission of Alaska, on May 1st, which I think illustrates where we're headed if we don't get a gas line going here. And I'm going to ask Andrew Jensen to come up and just talk for a moment about what that decision was, how that decision impacts urban Alaska, but how it also impacts rural Alaska. So Andrew, come on over.
Thank you, Governor. Andrew Jensen, Policy Advisor for the administration. And yes, I want to talk just briefly about the mechanics of the PCE program. I think everybody listening and in the room knows what it is and what it's intended to do in terms of equalizing the cost between the urban population and the rural population. Now, this is based on a formula that is set out in statute. It's AS 42.45.110C2 is the relevant section of this. And so this is a weighted average based on the power electricity rates in Juneau, Fairbanks, and Anchorage. And the way this is weighted, about 80% of the rate is driven by the rates in Anchorage and Fairbanks. And so what happens is every year the RCA sets the base rate. And that's based on these averages of power costs. And so last Friday, on May 1st, the RCA raised the PCE rate by nearly 10%, from 20.38 cents to 22.11 cents per kilowatt hour. So what does this mean? I mean, that not only shows that we have an increasing costs on the rail belt, but every time the rail belt rate increases, the rural power rate increases. And we know that this is at a time when fuel costs are skyrocketing here in town and especially in rural Alaska. And now, according to the Alaska Energy Authority, who manages and administers the PCE program, every 1 penny change in this urban rate is a $1.5 million impact in PCE communities. So this, approximately 2-cent increase, that's $3 million less in support for PCE communities for power rate. And so what are the big drivers here we saw? So Fairbanks is now at 31.6 cents per kilowatt hour, 31.6 per kilowatt. Why is that? Well, they're no longer getting gas from South Central. They used to get 30% of their power from South Central gas. Now they get 0. So right now in this current quarter, they're getting about 54% of their power from oil, and they're paying these prices for diesel. So obviously that's not sustainable. Back when they were getting some gas from NSTAR just a couple years ago, they were getting 21 and 29% of their power from oil. Now it's 54% in the current quarter. So then we look at MEA. MEA is now at 24.5 cents per kilowatt hour. Why is that? Well, there's lots of reasons, but they also just agreed to an increase in their price with Hillcorp just to get one more year of firm gas supply. So they just had a 15% increase in their cost of gas, $1.30 increase for MEA ratepayers. And then look at Chugach. So Chugach is now at 23.4 cents per kilowatt hour. Why is that? Chugach has less sales with declining population and a lack of economic development. When you have the same fixed cost but fewer sales, everybody pays more. So Chugach's increase is more than 2 cents per kilowatt from one year to the next, and they're about 64% of the weighted average on kilowatt sales. So they're the largest cost driver. They had the largest increase. So as you can see, what happens on the rail belt impacts rural Alaska, because when the rates go up on the rail belt, they go up in rural. And the same is also true the other direction. You drive rates down in urban Alaska, you will drive rates down in rural Alaska. And so with that, I think I'll just give it back to the governor here and explain what the impacts of that are.
Yeah, so we once again, we've been seeing these impacts since the mid-2000s. The closure of the Agrium plant, the export plant, the scramble to get more gas out of the inlet. I mean, I want to thank Hillcorp. I want to thank Hex and others that are trying to get more gas out of the inlet, but it's a very, very mature basin. And the hope that, we're going to stumble upon something large there, according to our people, is slim. And so we're going to squeeze a little more out of it. But in the end, we're going to start to feel the crunch here in Alaska. And what happens then to NSTAR, for example? We haven't even discussed that. So NSTAR has a system of piping. NSTAR has a system of customers. Well, what happens if the price of gas reaches a certain point, $17, $18, $19 a unit, and you're saying, it'll never happen. Right now, there's a contract signed with taking gas off the slope and trucking it to Fairbanks for almost $25 a unit. So it's already happening. So what happens is over time, either people leave and the NSTAR system becomes stressed, meaning fewer and fewer people are going to be required to carry the load. And then you start to get to a point where renewables make sense. It makes sense when you start to hit gas in the teens, high teens, just the cost of them. I know I've got 50 solar panels, so I have a personal understanding of how this works. Day like today, it doesn't work that great.
If you've been paying attention to what I've been saying on this show, this is the exact point that I've been making as to why people want to see the pipeline go away. Because if it means lower cost gas, then it ends the conversation about alternative renewable infrastructure in Alaska. Ends it, at least on the rail belt, because now you have the lowest cost energy source that Alaska can produce in massive quantities of gas for generations. It ends it. It is no longer competitive without federal or state subsidies. This is, I think, the underlying hesitation or conflict that is represented in the legislature, is that people recognize that if this happens, these other plans are going to go by the wayside. I want to point something out to you, and I don't have this document to show you right at the moment because I'm looking on my phone at the moment. But the EIA, a Federal Energy Information Agency, I believe, keeps track of what each one of the states that are reporting costs of natural gas to the customer. Okay, so as of September of 2025, the reported cost to them for the state of Alaska was $13.95 per 1,000 cubic feet. Okay, we're ranked 33rd highest consumer gas cost. Okay, we're down near the bottom. The bottom is ranked here is 43, because there was only 43 reporting states, is Idaho at $8.11 per 1,000. The largest amount, it would be no surprise, is Hawaii, $56.92 per 1,000. Texas, he's been having a conversation about Texas and the gas that they have and the mass. I mean, lots of stuff, natural gas flowing in Texas, right? This is all before the whole Iran situation kicked off, right? Texas, $30.71 per 1,000. He's talking about high teens. Okay. Kansas is at $17.80. Pennsylvania, $18.43. Kentucky, $19.61. South Carolina, $19.70. Wyoming, $20.27. He's making a argument for why the pipeline costs so much to build, that it's expensive in Alaska. And he's making an argument that gas is going away in Cook Inlet because you can't find it, because it's dwindling. It's a resource that's dwindling and we don't know it. We don't have enough. Okay. Which I think is actually not true. It's not accurate. There is gas out there. It's just expensive, very expensive to go get it. So the reality is, and nobody wants to hear this. And this is why I'm putting, like, many of the cost factors that are causing those other states to have higher cost gas is not in the production and not in the transportation. It's in the regulation. It is in the taxes and the tax structure that goes in here, right? So a lot of that is that. But the point that I'm trying to get to is that the cost of gas that Alaskans have been benefiting from is not a result of the market. See, the market with South Central Gas, that market cost would have gone up a long time ago, because the producers that were producing and going after gas would have needed more for their gas to keep doing what they were doing. It's expensive to go find gas. So they would need a market where they can actually make money. But our RCA, Regulatory Commission of Alaska, kept a lid on the price of gas, similar to what the legislature, the Senate Resources Committee, as we'll see in a little bit, has put and as keeps in their SCS a a price cap on prices. So because the market is demanding more for gas, the producers in South Central Alaska need more in order to stay in production. Costs are going up everywhere, right? But our government says, no, we're protecting the people and we're keeping low-cost gas. All right, well, now you only have 2 producers to speak of, maybe 3 in Cook Inlet. You don't have enough to keep up with the demand to produce the supply. And it's largely because you've regulated producers out of Cook Inlet, not because the gas isn't there. Hex Fury went and found gas, and thank God they did, because that was necessary for this last winter. So it's there, it can be found, and we have people that can go find it. It is a cost, it is a market situation where you've got to be able, as the producer, as the explorer, you got to be able to have certain assurances that when you spend your money going after the gas and you find it, you're actually going to be able to sell it and make a profit. Otherwise, you don't go do it. Same thing that Glenfarne's looking at for this pipeline is, hey, we got to put all of the ducks in the row for this giga project, and we still got to be able to make money at the end of the day. And if we can't do it, then we will not have a positive financial investment decision. And part of that conversation is, what is the cost going to be for the legislature? So if you've got members of the legislature who are more interested in windmills and solar panels and batteries than they are a long-term supply of natural gas, well, they don't have to balk at anything. They don't have to be honest with their position. They just have to take action that's going to scuttle the project. And I think that's what we're seeing in the legislature. The point that I'm getting at with bringing up this EIA situation is, we may have to pay more in gas. If we screw this up and the pipeline doesn't get built, the only alternatives are higher cost gas from South Central Alaska or higher cost LNG imported. Those are your alternatives. Or if you want to follow Willie Keppel's advice, turn up some coal plants. We got plenty of coal. It's just political correctness that's preventing us from being able to do that. We've got alternatives for low-cost energy. It's just what we consider low cost is changing. Okay? The cost, what we considered low cost in the past is a thing of the past. It's not coming back. To think that we're going to have $5 gas, I don't think it's realistic. Just looking at things, just looking at what is out there with respect to the rest of the United States, there's pressure from investors that are going to say, why are you basing it at $5 gas? You could make profit if it was $6 gas or $10 gas, but at $5 gas, you're not going to make any profit, right? Let me change gears just a second and show you something. For years, the pipeline and the export facility were a thing together. They were coupled. So as soon as you were able to export gas, you had import or domestic supply of gas, and your export price would help keep a downwards pressure on the local cost. Glenfarne steps in and they do this. They come up with this model that says, we're going to do a phased approach. We're going to build the pipeline and provide domestic gas, and it'll pay for itself. And then we'll build phase 2, which is the export facility. Okay, well, if you're an investor and you say, okay, I'm going to build this big pipeline and it'll pay for itself, then politics could change, things could change, and we never get around to phase 2 and building the export facility. God forbid. Okay. Then Alaskans are stuck with this big pipeline. And what is the cost of gas to be profitable at that point? Well, it's not $13.95, which is what we're paying now per EIA. It's somewhere above that. And in the scale of what is expensive gas in the industry, well, stateside, Arkansas is the highest at $33.23 per thousand. So industry looks at gas around and they say, well, where it's cheaper to buy it and or cheaper to go after it and build pipelines, right? In the lower 48, some of those states are paying the highest, right? They're higher than what Alaska's paying. So the industry, investors, the industry is looking at the price that we're expecting and saying, well, that's not realistic. Nobody pays $5 gas. The costs in the lower 48 are more than $5 gas. Nobody down there pays $5 gas, and it's and it's cheaper to do everything down there. Alaskans are saying, no, we're Alaskans. We got gas plenty, and we want cheap. We want $5. It's not a realistic. I'd love to have $5 gas or whatever. I'd love to have $1 gas. I mean, you know what I'm saying? I'd like it to be as least costly as possible. But the reality is, and you don't want to hear this, Alaskans, you don't want to hear it. The reality is, in order to get gas to your home, it's going to be more expensive than what you're expecting. That's the reality. You want to build a pipeline? It's going to be more than $5 gas. That's my take on it. I'm just reading the tea leaves. I'm looking at what's happening in other states, and I'm saying Alaska's not got a whole lot of leg to stand on when they're talking about this in closed door rooms where Glenfarne is asking, they've got their hand out looking for money, and the investors are saying, well, how much are you going to sell gas for? Glenfarne's like, well, we can be profitable at, and there's a minimum level. I mean, of course, if Glenfarne could sell the gas at the maximum level, of course they're going to be profitable, right? If they could sell gas to Hawaii at $56 a thousand, well, heck, they'd be profitable. Quantity given a similar quantity. The point that I'm getting at is Glenfarne goes to the investors and they have to say, we're going to sell gas at a rate that makes us profitable. That's a rate that we can agree with the customer. That's the export customer. That's a rate. Well, we've already got some sort of an agreement with our producers. Get it? The producers are selling it for maybe $1 something, and then it's being sold elsewhere for much more. Anyway, I'm speaking truth as I know it, as what I think it is, and hopefully I'm preparing you for some bad news that's going to be coming that's going to burst your bubble, right? Low cost gas may not be exactly what you think of it, but if you were paying, I don't know what the average is here. Just quick math, the low of 8 and high of 33. So you math whizzes, what is that, 20? New Hampshire's paying $22.05. Virginia's paying 20.71. So if you're paying $20 and now you build a pipeline and you can pay 10, well, that's cheap gas, isn't it? As Governor Dunleavy said, what's the alternative? If you don't build the pipeline, the alternative is the potential of not having gas at a Cook Inlet, or if you're going to pay more, you're going to have gas at a Cook Inlet, but you're going to pay more. Or you import it. And if none of those things are palatable to you, or if you have an ulterior motive that says, well, I really want to get rid of fossil fuels, then we'll go the route that he's talking about, which is windmills and solar panels and batteries, which is not reliable for Alaskans. It's the wrong direction to go.
Midwinter, it doesn't work that great. So you're really looking at problems for the residents. But again, it basically forfeits any opportunity for businesses coming. So again, I would ask that those in the legislature that are him and hawing, and again, there are many working hard on this bill to make it happen, and I want to thank them. But we got to get something done here soon. This moment in time is not going to happen. You're not going to get the President of the United States behind a project like this. This is one of the signature, major, huge projects for the country and for Alaska. You're not going to get a Persian Gulf happening every day. You're not going to get any diminishing oil base or gas base in here. And lest we forget, we set records in March in Anchorage for cold. We set records in Fairbanks for consecutive days below freezing. So the draw on what limited gas we have, it was tremendous this year, but we have an opportunity. All right. So I'm going to go to something here pretty quick. SB 64, the election bill, there was an override vote today that failed. I also have a pension bill sitting on my desk. And here's what I would like to say to the legislature is there's a real opportunity to get a number of things done if we work together. I've said that before. I've said that probably a dozen times. Sending a bill to me after it goes through the process, as opposed to sitting down right before it comes out of rules to the floor for a vote, it's probably not the greatest idea, but we have 3 weeks left to work on this PILT and get a gas line, but we also have 3 weeks left to work on other things that may be near and dear to certain legislators.
Okay. What does that mean to you? What does that mean to you? I've been saying it. What does it mean to you? What do you think he's saying there? That's clear as day to me. Clear as day. I don't know what Governor Dunleavy's plans are politically after office. But if he's able to leave office, having ushered in a new defined benefits plan and a pipeline, he's going to be popular with a lot of people for whatever he needs to go do. Just saying. What we just heard was the governor telegraphing that there is a quid pro quo offer on the table. You sent me the defined benefits bill. Now send me my PILT bill. And we'll do business. So that's, I think, as close to an answer to my prediction as you're going to get until it actually happens. That's what I heard. Okay. Enough of that. Let's jump to Senate Resources because it's important to hear what they have to say on their new CS, since there's going to be a PILT bill headed to the governor so they can get their defined benefits.
Through the changes from version G to version H, and then she'll be followed by Sonia Kawasaki, Senate Majority Legal Counsel. Ms. Brown, summary of changes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Senate Resources Committee. For the record, Paige Brown, staff to Senator Giesel. The changes from version G to version H of Senate Bill 280 are as follows. In version H, we added a Dalton Highway maintenance surcharge of 30 cents per barrel on non-royalty oil and related conforming changes to ensure the surcharge cannot be offset by credits or deducted.
Another tax on oil in a gas pipeline bill.
We removed these expenditure provisions from version G relating to limiting gas-related deductions against oil production tax. It removes public transparency and disclosure requirements, including the AGDC project database and related reporting provisions. Removes required publication of prevailing value determinations for royalty and production tax purposes while retaining the valuation standard. eliminates the special alternative volumetric tax appeals process, reverting to the standard tax appeals process. Adds the Regulatory Commission of Alaska enforced protections on pipeline rates, including prohibition on passing through cost overruns and establishing rate caps. Clarifies in-state utility priority over exports for pipeline capacity. Expands legislative oversight and accountability of AGDC, including legislative approval for subsidiary sales, bonds, and foreign ownership investment relationships. Required state participation option in revenue generating projects, and a requirement to use competitive bidding and Alaska bidder preference in procurement. It makes AGDC subject to the Open Meetings Act, increasing transparency in decision making. Clarifies AGDC tax treatment, including limiting tax exemption and exempting AGDC owned portions from the new entity tax. It expands petroleum property tax to include LNG plants and marine terminals. It clarifies the alternative volumetric tax structure, including proportional liability for multiple owners and exclusion of LNG refrigeration gas. It revises the failure contingency to allow continuation if a major project component is operational by January 1st, 2032, and adds an effective date for the new pipeline corridor maintenance surcharge for July 1st, 2027.
Thank you. With that, I'm going to ask Sonia Kawasaki, Senate Majority Legal Counsel, to take us through individual sections of the bill, summarizing the changes so that members and the public can see.
Okay, so they had some what they would call transparency requirements that sounds like they pulled out of the bill with this CS. It sounds like they have agreed to go with the volumetric tax as opposed to staying with the property tax, which is a give on their part. Both of those are gives. The tax on oils, oil barrels, and I don't know how to, not exactly, it went quick, so I can't repeat it, but that oil tax that's in the gas bill is probably a calculation on their part. I'll explain more in a second. It sounds like they did away with the other oil tax issues that they were trying to get to. Wilkowski's baby. So this is a recognition that they want to go forward with a bill. They don't want to be seen as killing the project. And they want something to go forward. So the calculation is, how much can we stuff in this bill that we want? We know the governor's not going to like it, but how much can we stuff in the bill that he's going to accept, because the alternative is a veto and he doesn't want to veto the bill? If we ask for too much, the bill's going to get vetoed. So there's an assessment or a guess here, a strategic guess as to how much we can stick in here and get what we want, and the governor's going to accept it. Don't think that because he's got a defined benefits bill sitting on his table that he's going to get his version of a PILT bill. No way. That's not how things work. He's got their bill and he's demanding that this bill come forward, but he's not going to like it. Not going to like it one bit. It's going to have the bare minimum of what he needs in order to be to sign the bill and allow it to go forward.
Where these items are in the bill and the changes that have been made in it. Ms. Kawasaki, welcome. One moment, Ms. Kawasaki. Let me also add that Mr. Dan Stickle, Chief Economist, Tax Division, is Department of Revenue, is available for questions, and so is Nick Fulford with Gaffney Klein. Ms. Kawasaki, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Senate Resources Committee. For the record, I'm Sonia Kawasaki, Senate Majority Legal Counsel. This afternoon, we'll go over changes of the SB 280 CS that was released today, which is version H before you. So first of all, the new name of this act is supporting a Gasline for Alaskans Act, or the SAGA Act.
That's really important. They want to be able to say we're in support. So we're going to come up with a fancy name and say we're helping support the bill or support the pipeline. Okay. It's going to be interesting to see how the tune changes here. There are some slides that they're going to show here, so we're not going to have to step through and listen to the changes like we did with the sectional analysis. So we'll be able to see slides here in just a minute.
The SB 280 version H Senate Resources CS makes some technical changes, some clarifying changes, and some conforming changes, and establishes some substantive changes from the prior CS. So the first item is, in exercising its purposes, AGDC must act as a fiduciary in the best interest of the state. And this is under Section 8, which is on page 3. The next
Ms. Kawasaki, pause for a moment.
Sure.
Why is that important? Why would that be in the bill?
Madam Chair, the current language in law that has AGDC's best interest of the state in mind as it performs its duties and exercises its purposes did not include fiduciary duties, and fiduciary duties are generally an elevated standard of care, and those standards have legal ramifications if they are not followed. And so we thought it would be important to add fiduciary duties to AGDC because the structure of the Glen Farn / AGDC relationship appears relatively new to state of Alaska business models, and we were just a little bit more concerned about the interest of the state being looked after by AGDC, and we wanted to make sure that we added it to the bill.
Thank you.
The next bullet, the CS modifies existing AGDC procurement law, which is establishing that the board must adopt regulations reflecting competitive bidding principles and equitable opportunities to vendors, and address emergency situations, and where bidding is involved would incorporate a mechanism for Alaska bidder preference. And this provision was modeled off of existing laws that the Alaska Housing Finance Corporation and the Alaska Industrial Development and Export Authority has to follow some level of regulations that would address competitive bidding principles. In current law, AGDC didn't have that requirement. It had a requirement to come up with its own procurement procedures by the board. And when I reviewed those procedures, the procedures were simply that if the contract would be under $5 million, that the executive director could approve of the contract unilaterally, and above $5 million, it had to be approved by the board. So we were sort of putting a little more sideboards on that and trying to ensure that Alaska businesses receive preference.
Maybe I've been away from Juneau too long, or just long enough to not understand why that is necessary. If we're talking, I was going to say necessary for the pipeline, but that is not a prerequisite for things to be in the bill, obviously, because we've got prior CSs or committee substitutes that had oil taxes, and this CS has an oil tax in it that has nothing to do with the pipeline. So I don't know what they're getting at what like I understand what they're saying, but I don't understand why that's pertinent here. And I'm going to have to do some research. If you can follow along with what the implications are and want to chime in, then go right ahead. But modifying AGDC's structure to make them act as a fiduciary agent or have fiduciary responsibility, and then modifying their procurement law, AGDC's already agreed to give 75% of the project to Glenfarne. And in order for the state of Alaska through AGDC or some subsidiary corporation to exercise our 25% ownership, we're going to have to come up with dollars. We're going to have to buy in. Otherwise, that 25% ownership means squat. Procurement law that's telling AGDC that its corporation must do something. I don't see how that applies to the corporation that's in charge of the pipeline, building the pipeline. So I don't get why. I'm gonna have to ask some questions, because I don't understand why modifying AGDC would have anything to do with the structure or the plan for building the pipeline. And maybe it has nothing to do with it. Maybe it is looking down the road as to what's next. Either the pipeline dies and AGDC exists still, or the pipeline gets built and AGDC exists. And whatever's next, we're looking down the road expecting that AGDC will stick around. We're just going to make sure that they'll have some additional requirements in the future. I don't see how this has anything to do with the pipeline. And again, that would be par for the course for this committee. Like they don't seem too focused on just focusing on, keeping the bill narrow and making it easy for it to sail through the legislature and helping a pipeline get built. So, Rick asked the question, what was the business model with the oil pipeline, with TAPS? I think what you're probably asking is you got AGDC corporation, public corporation, and Glenfarne private corporation, and the other corporations that were involved. Gosh, that was before my time, and I don't know the answer to that question. I will have to find out. My stab at answering that question is that it was private. It was all private. There were agreements, and it is privately built. I could be wrong with that. So, Rick, I'm going to have to owe you an answer to that.
Very good.
The next item, in the prior version of this CS, there were two limitations that were meant to reduce energy rates to Alaskans specifically, and they were to prevent the passing on of cost overruns from the pipeline construction as charges to Alaskans. And then we had price caps that we added for prior to the exportation facility coming online and after.
Okay, so preventing passing on cost overruns is not controversial, I don't think. Glenfarne has already said that they are not intending to pass cost overruns from pipeline construction onto ratepayers. So putting this in here likely has no impact on whether it gets vetoed or signed or whether the pipeline would go through or not. I don't think Glenfarne was intending to do that anyway. Their whole point was keeping the cost down on consumers, and cost overruns passed to Alaskans or to Koreans or Japanese would not go well. So, in my opinion, this is maybe a CYA and a technicality, but not controversial.
After the export facility coming online, and that was $12 prior to and $5 after per 1,000 cubic feet. And those were based on statements by Governor Dunleavy on what the expectation was for gas prices to Alaskans, how low they are expected to be. So we just added those to the last bill under AGDC duties. In this bill, we made sure to add it to RCA, our Regulatory Commission of Alaska, oversight duties. And from my understanding, they can implement it because they will receive the documentation they need in order to ensure that these provisions would be enforceable.
Ms. Kawasaki, to make it perhaps clearer, in other words, we retained these two elements and we moved them to the RCA jurisdiction. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. I understood, although it would take me a little bit to confirm, but I understood that it was going to be added to the RCA provisions of law and not removed from the AGDC duties. So it should appear in both places.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Senator Kawasaki.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. This is about the last section, which had to do with the competitive bidding and non-sole source. We already have allegedly an EPC contractor assigned. That's what Glenn Farn has told us about the pipeline. And what happens in the case in which that contractor is not utilizing competitive bidding?
Through the chair, Senator Kawasaki, thank you for the question. Generally speaking, in terms of contract law, we cannot impair an existing contract. And so if there's existing contracts that are already been authorized under our prior law, I think only to the extent that it doesn't disrupt the new requirements wouldn't disrupt that contract, would it be enforceable?
Follow up?
Yeah, just because it seems like we've heard from Glenn Farn, they'd like to put pipe in the ground beginning in December of this year, meaning they would have had to purchase pipe or at least have pipes on agreement now. I mean, essentially now. So I'm just curious if that would prohibit them, or if they may have already done it, then we're still fine at this point. So thank you.
Senator Kawasaki, one of the things I think about is the construction of man camps, for example. Who will the vendors be to supply those man camps with food and whatever else, going forward? So yes, certainly whatever's already been adopted, we can't do anything with. All right, any other questions on slide number 2? Seeing none, I'll let you move on, Ms. Kawasaki.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The first bullet on page 3, slide 3, is a technical change.
I just want to throw this out there. If your legislature is worried about man camps and who's providing food, they're probably down in the weeds a little too far. Like, that is something that private industry should be able to figure out without legislative oversight. It is none of the legislature's business.
In the last CS, we had added that essentially Alaskans would, through their public utility as carriers.
Somebody's phone is vibrating. It is not mine. That is in the recording. Probably Ms. Kawasaki's. And just so you're aware, for those that are not, Senator Kawasaki and Ms. Kawasaki, the testifier, or sorry, not testifier, Senate Majority Legal Counsel, are siblings. They're not married. They're siblings.
Alaskans would receive priority over, Alaskans would receive priority through the public utilities shipping agreements with the pipeline. And it turns out that this is not the model that Glenn Farn is utilizing. Glenn Farn is going to be its own shipper. And so we just had a technical change that would apply that same principle to the gas sales agreements. And so if capacity in the pipeline is reduced, that Alaskans would receive priority through their gas sales agreements through their utilities.
Thank you. I don't see any questions on that.
The next bullet is We deleted certain changes addressing the legislature's ability to obtain information currently protected by existing confidentiality agreements. And these included requesting to sign non-disclosure agreements and obtaining information in executive session. The reason for these removals is that I understood that our members were hesitant to sign non-disclosure agreements because there was a desire to be able to share information with their constituents, and having to contain it and not be able to speak freely about it by having to sign non-disclosure agreement and potentially be subject to penalties for publicly disclosing information on accident was not desirable anymore. And that is a similar concept to why we removed the executive session possibility of reviewing information only in the executive sessions.
Senator Clayman has a question.
So the prior idea was we would try to have some means in which legislators and potentially legislative staff could learn more details about the project in some kind of a confidential structure. And in this version of the bill, that'll no longer be an option either. It'll be information that we can receive publicly, or we won't receive it at all.
Through the chair, Senator Clayman, thank you for the question. There are still provisions in the bill that would address the parties who signed a confidentiality agreement could still waive the confidentiality terms that they have signed. And they could also consent to coming before committees, coming before Legislative Budget and Audit Committee on their own, consenting on their own. And we also are seeking some technical changes to the provisions that allowed for certain terms to not be confidential moving forward once the bill is enacted, so that certain things that I've heard legislators' concerns over would be project economics, summaries, potential estimates of those economics, and those would be still made public under the bill.
Follow up?
But the basic place is that, to the extent right now that we aren't getting much information from AGDC or from Glenfarne, the option of going to confidentiality agreements as a means for us to learn more about it isn't in the bill. It ends up becoming, what do they choose to do? We're back in sort of the place of what might they choose to disclose, but we're not going to be doing that. We're not going to learn it confidentially.
No.
Senator Clayman, the Glenfarne has actually offered to the legislature to have these confidential disclosures. And so to have it in the bill seemed a bit of an overreach. Consequently, it was portions of it were deleted.
They do not have to have this in the bill to do what they could do in the first place. All right. They already can have signed non-disclosures, and they can already have executive session meetings to talk about things. It doesn't need to be in the bill and complicate the bill. Okay. Doing that was just political grandstanding. It wasn't necessary.
As Ms. Kawasaki shared.
And honestly, I mean, there's two sides to this coin. The legislature, in order to make good decisions, needs to have transparency, and the private industry needs to ensure that some sensitive information doesn't become public information. Okay. So one side of the coin is legislators ought to go avail themselves of the information. That way they can make a good decision. The flip side of that coin is we don't have legislators that trust themselves that they're going to be able to not say and not spill the beans. So they're scared. They're scared that they're going to say something inadvertently that is going to get them in trouble. And so really it's a competence issue. We don't want to have that conversation off the record. We don't want to have it on a subject to a non-disclosure, because then I might not keep my mouth shut and I might get in trouble for that. Like, okay. Who did we elect?
Further questions?
No, I mean, I think they've told us before they'd if we enter into a confidentiality agreement, they'll share it with us, but if we're not entering a confidentiality agreement, then we don't have the information.
It doesn't need to
Thank
be
you,
in the
Senator
bill.
Clayman.
Senator
Further
Clayman.
questions? All right, the next bullet point.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next bullet point on page 3 is the third bullet point, technical changes to merge separate accounting requirements of revenue generated from an option contract that's been exercised to acquire a revenue or an interest in a revenue generating project, and the revenue generated from a subsidiary of the corporation. We merged it into one section just for clarity on where the revenue lands and the ability to appropriate it.
I see no questions. Now we're on slide 4.
Madam Chair, under slide 4, the first bullet, we deleted requirements of ADDC to establish an online public disclosure database. That was at this point in time seen as unnecessary and a little tedious. And at the time that we were seeking it, it was to provide more enlightenment to the public on who would be investing in this project and who the gas purchasers would be. But I think at this moment, we are not going to require that level of detail of disclosure from ADDC.
All right, next bullet point.
The next bullet point is we have deleted gas purchase agreements from the list of legal relationships with foreign entities that would require legislative approval. This is in response to a comment from Senator Myers in a previous hearing where he noted that we had a list of items that met the requirement of a legal relationship from which the legislature had to approve, and gas purchase agreements was in that list, and it is not desired by the policymakers for, in the first instance, that probably all of the gas purchase agreements that will be made for exporting will be completely foreign entities, and we know that already. So I think there is not as much of a concern on that particular relationship.
Well, it's a good thing that she thinks that there's not much concern. I feel much better that Miss Kawasaki has that opinion. You know, here's the thing. As we're watching basically an undoing of much of the first CS, well, at least some of the first CS, the general public is not going to remember what was in the first CS 90 days, 6 months, a year from now, 30 days from now. No one's going to remember. The actual bill that goes forward is what will be discussed. All of the nonsense that gets thrown in here through this discussion process, nobody's going to remember it.
Any questions on that? All right, seeing none.
The third bullet on slide 4 has to do with prevailing value determinations for royalties. In our past CS, we had included a publication requirement where the value would be published, as well as a summary of how that value was determined, as well as the report on the determination by the Department of Natural Resources Commissioner would have been able to be accessed publicly. We removed that because we received a lot of input from industry and concerned members of the public that this might actually cause a problem that would allow producers to lower potential values that or costs that they would have expected to have Glenfarne purchase gas from them, and then that would result in lower actual potential revenues to the state of Alaska, and we wanted to avoid that potentiality, so we removed the reporting requirements from the prevailing value determination. The actual determination itself is still part of the bill, and so in this instance, Department of Natural Resources will still be conducting a prevailing value determination. It just won't be made public. And then similarly, for the prevailing value determination for production taxes, we included a requirement of the Department of Revenue to publish that value and publish the reporting on it. And we have now deleted that as well for the same reason as we did for the prevailing value for royalties.
So are you thinking, just out of curiosity, do you think that it's likely that when they drafted the bill and had that stuff in it, that they were trying to pull a fast one on industry? They're like, hey, maybe no one will notice. Do you think that was likely? Or do you think it was just ignorance? They're like, we want to do this, but we just are dumb and we don't know what the consequence is of that. Do you think that's the case? Or is there some other third option that I'm not missing? Because it's a waste of time. Like the stuff that went into the first CS wasn't necessary to go into the CS to get a pipeline bill through. It's a waste of time. Now they're pulling it out and they're finding justifications for why, it was a reasonable provision. And we learned, through reasonable conversations with industry that this would have unintended consequences, right? Complete BS.
Okay, so we'll pause there. Any questions on that? As Ms. Kawasaki indicated, the industry certainly expressed concern about the publication and what that would do in terms of setting prices and things like that. All right. That takes us to slide 5, I believe.
And Madam Chair, I completely apologize because I realized as I sat down here this afternoon that I missed a slide or a bullet on one of the most important aspects of the CS, which is that we deleted the limitation on gas lease expenditure deductions from the ability to deduct against oil taxes. So that provision doesn't appear in your bill because it's a deletion and is omitted from the bill. And what we had to remind the committee, what we had been trying to do is attempt to separate oil and gas lease expenditures and then prevent gas lease expenditures from being deducted against oil taxes over a concern that it was going to reduce our revenue substantially and unreasonably. But it was very difficult to determine a method to separate oil from gas lease expenditures.
It is amazing. It is amazing to think what you're willing to pull out of the bill that you were championing just last week when you realize, oh, you know what? I really want a defined benefits bill. I don't want this provision bad enough. I want the defined benefits bill. So I'll just pull this. We'll deal. Sorry, Senator Wielechowski. We'll get at it another way. There's another bill out there. We'll see what we can do. We really want a defined benefits bill.
And we're in receiving a lot of feedback from industry. We just decided to avoid that concern. We will save it for another day on how to make that determination.
So, to make it a simplified statement, the bill doesn't change oil tax law.
That's correct, Madam Chair.
I want the public to be sure to understand that, okay? And that was a lot of explanation that you had. I wanted to put it in very simple terms for the public who are listening and the industry who also had concerns about that. Senator Rauscher, you had a question.
We're so reasonable,
So
aren't
it's
we?
a net tax.
I don't understand your question. What is it?
Well, oil is a net tax, and gas we had talked about earlier was a gross tax, and now this is all net tax.
Gas continues in law as a gross tax. Oil continues in law as a net tax. There's no change. What we were doing previously was trying to separate the deduction for gas production costs, those capital investments that would be made to pull gas out of the ground, prevent it being used against the tax you would owe on oil. They're both coming out of the same hole. It is difficult to separate them. We certainly heard that from owners of the Point Thompson unit.
All right. Thank you.
Senator Dunbar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think you explained it very well. I was pushing early on in this to do what's called decoupling, where you couldn't count your gas expenses against your oil taxes. We heard from the Director Stickle, that is very difficult and complicated to accomplish. It was reflected in their fiscal note. And so I am a little bit disappointed, but I really
wanted to
think
find benefits,
Bill. CS listens to the Department of Revenue and listens to the AOGA testimony, which was that that would be extremely difficult to do, and so it's been removed from this version. And if there is a reopening of oil taxes, it'll be a much more detailed conversation in the future.
Okay,
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Dunbar. And just for the public, AOGA is the Alaska Oil and Gas Association. Using acronyms, of course, can be confusing to the public, and I want the public to understand what we're doing in this bill. Further questions about the provision that I will add, I appreciate very much Ms. Kawasaki presenting this and putting this presentation together about the changes in the bill. And thank you for catching the omission of that particular change. Thank you for doing that. All right, so I think we're on slide 5 now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'd be happy to just add in a slide to augment on that lease expenditures provision, just so that it completes the presentation. Slide 5, we had to modify the language of the S Corp tax to ensure that state corporations are exempt from the tax, but that the qualified entities and partnerships with the state corporations are not exempt. And then we also added a caveat in the S Corp tax in particular that AGDC must file a tax return that is not confidential, and that only extends to AGDC. It does not extend to other state corporations.
Senator Kawasaki, you look like you have a question.
No.
All right, okay. Any questions on that? All right, moving on to the second bullet point on that page.
The second bullet point has to do with technical changes to the new S Corp tax, where we deleted a reference about filing a filing mechanism for tax returns. The reference in that provision in the prior CS seemed to reference corporate income tax, and we don't think that it applied directly. And so rather than modify that provision, we omitted it because the S Corp tax can be applied regardless of if we add a requirement for filing tax returns, because Department of Revenue knows how to seek taxes that we put to law.
All right, seeing no questions, the last bullet point
Sure,
on
the last-
slide 5.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The last bullet point has to do with amending the types of income subject to the S Corp tax. Specifically, we have clarified that income from marine transportation of LNG produced in the state is covered by the tax. And we also removed the reference to income produced from sales of gas in the state. The rationale for clarifying that the income from marine transportation is specifically for LNG produced in the state was to cover the concern that there is some gas transportation that is occurring from locations in the state to other locations in the state, and we didn't want to sweep them into this and end up into this tax and end up them extending those costs to the small communities that they serve.
So somebody said, hey, you're going to kill the bill with this S Corp tax. Okay. So we want to have the S Corp tax apply to gas that's sold in state. But gas that's sold out of state to other companies, that'll apply, right? Specifically clarifying that income from marine transportation of LNG produced in the state is covered by the tax. Removing the reference to income from sales of gas produced in the state. So you're basically saying we don't want to tax the sale of in-state gas. We just want to tax the sale of out-of-state gas, of exported gas. That's what I read here.
Senator Dunbar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm looking at the prior version, the prior CS, page 22, section 23. And I remember the Alaska Oil and Gas Industry Association, also raised concerns here. I think it was section F and subsections F and G. And they, pointed out there might be very small carriers like Crowley or whomever that are taking, transporting oil and gas. And it looks like you've deleted subsection F and then changed the marine transport to just LNG. And of course, none of the folks that ship stuff inside Alaska use LNG because you'd have to regasify it and all the rest of it. So is that an accurate summation of what you did, Ms. Kawasaki?
Through the chair, Senator Dunbar, thank you for that summary. And that is my understanding of why we modified the language in those two subsections.
Okay, very good. Well, I appreciate that you made that change. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Dunbar, for pointing that out. That is something, again, we heard from the Alaska Oil and Gas Association. Senator Myers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Ms. Kawasaki, I'm not sure how tax law starts to work with foreign-owned companies. Let's say that one of our prospective East Asian customers decides to send their own ship, or they contract with a transportation company and send it here. And so it's not a U.S. owned company. Can we still, are they still subject to Alaska's tax law? Would we still be recouping some money from them if they're picking up the LNG here in state?
Through the chair, Senator Myers, this tax would apply to the income that is comes from business in Alaska, and I guess it would. I would have to research how that business transaction occurs and whether they are making income in the state of Alaska from that from that marine transportation.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Kawasaki, well, you'd be speculating, but because it would be a foreign country and only the federal government can impose taxes with international trade, likely we would not be able to tax that entity.
You're not taxing that entity.
Would you say, or is that speculation?
Chair, I do know that if I responded at all, I would be speculating.
Yes.
But I also do know that we do tax foreign entities who are, say, oil producers in the state, and they are required to file as corporations. So they are taxed as corporate entities. But I know that, that is oil produced in the state. That particular nexus having to do with transportation, I think I would just have to research Senator Myers' question and get back to the committee.
Thank you. It'd be an interesting question to pose related to the transport of oil from Valdez.
Very good, yeah.
Further questions, Senator Myers?
No, thank you.
Anything else from anyone? All right. Let's see. Are we on slide 6 now of the explanation of changes? All right. Very good.
So, Madam Chair, this section, this slide goes over a new surcharge and pipeline corridor maintenance fund that we've established in the CS version H. It basically establishes that the infrastructure maintenance surcharge of 30 cents per barrel produced in the state of oil will be imposed on oil producers, and then revenue from the new surcharge will be placed in a new pipeline corridor maintenance fund, and that fund will be available for appropriation for maintenance and operations costs incurred to the state along the Dalton Highway corridor, or as it's written right now, other impacted areas. And Madam Chair, this committee probably remembers that this concept was actually introduced by the governor in his fiscal plan, which was for our body SB 227 earlier in the session. And it was an interesting concept that I think that a lot of members were willing to test out in other areas of policy. And so we adopted it for this CS. And I might add that we increased it from what the governor proposed, which was 15 cents per barrel to 30 cents per barrel, in part because we have now learned since the governor had introduced his bill that the Secretary of the Interior, the federal government, has purported to hand over the Dalton corridor to Alaska for purposes of mining development. And so we had concerns that there was going to be even more impacts to the Dalton Highway corridor that needs more updating in maintenance. So that was part of why we raised the amount from what the governor had originally proposed.
Thank you, Ms. Kosa.
But no oil taxes are being adjusted here. I get it. I understand what they're, so we're going to take over responsibility for the pipeline corridor, and they want to have, they want to have a new funding source for that. We don't want that money to come out of general funds. We want to raise taxes in order to meet that new requirement.
The project company Glenfarne has stated that it is their intention to repair any roads that are damaged during the construction of this project. They in fact can't do that. Our roads are federally regulated. We have state law related to mixed design for asphalt, concrete, what gravel should be used in certain areas. And so that would be still a cost incurred on the state to repair those roads. So I know Senator Dunbar was particularly interested in this, and so that would be the intention of this. Senator Dunbar, do you have any idea how much revenue would be brought in by this 30 cents?
Well, if trying to remember, I think the governor's version of 15 cents would bring in about 25 million, I believe. I think I'm looking at 25, 26, so twice that would be about 50. But I remember from our conversations there, and I believe at the finance subcommittee regarding transportation, that even that isn't enough to do the maintenance that the Dalton Highway requires. That is, I think the estimate was something closer to 80 million needed to fix yearly to fix the Dalton. And so this is partial, but it's not, it's a lot closer. I've also heard the number 450 million as a reference to the upgrades that Dalton Highway will need for the new, larger, heavier pipe that will be involved in this project. But I can't, to be honest, I don't remember where that number comes from. And so I think Senator Wielkowski said it once, and I don't want to, perhaps he'll be able to inform us on that. But, regardless, we are going to have to maintain and upgrade that corridor in order, both because of this construction, but also for the pipe itself, but also for things like upgrades at Point Thompson. And we know from the governor's own bill that we needed some source of revenue, even if it was just the status quo. That is, the Dalton Highway is poorly maintained. But I see Senator Myers has his hands up, and he understands how poorly maintained that road is better than I do. So I'll just say that I appreciate the inclusion of this bill. I think it's necessitated by the both the additional construction, and frankly, I'll just say this is a little bit off topic, Madam Chair, but we had testimony from Director Stickle that rather than use a complicated new system like decoupling to try to address our revenue going negative in the short term, we should pull the policy levers we already have. So I saw that you have the S Corp in here still. That's a policy lever we have. And then this is a policy lever that I believe would be easy to implement, because in the governor's original fiscal note for this, there is no requested additional people at DOR, and I know that Mr. Stickle will hear from Mr. Stickle later, but that's what the fiscal note says to the governor's proposal 227. So I believe this can be implemented easily. easier, at least, than decoupling. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Dunbar. Senator Myers, your expert opinion.
Well, I'll provide my expert opinion, then I have my own question for Ms. Kawasaki.
Sure.
If I remember right, the $450 million figure came from DOT regarding what they've got programmed in the STIP for the next few years. Is not directly related to the Gasline. It's what they kind of already had planned. And again, since that's the STIP, a large portion of that is going to be federal money as well. If I remember right, DOT told me last year that
STIP is State Improvement Plan.
they spend approximately $20 million a year to maintain the Dalton. Now they could use some more. Not going to tell you that, but that's just that's a current state of it. But to that point, then my question for Ms. Kawasaki: when this version, when the version of the governor's bill that had this concept in it, although at a different dollar figure, was before us, we got an answer in writing from DOT that said that the money that would be collected likely would end up supplanting existing funds to the Dalton or maybe other highways along the way, the Richardson, et cetera. So in effect, while the state was bringing in more money, it wouldn't have actually helped with that, help actually improve the situation on the Dalton Highway or any of the other roads in question. So my question is, how in this bill, in this version before us, do we have anything in here that's going to make sure that we're adding to rather than simply displacing the funds that are currently being spent?
Again, this is a tax, a 30-cent tax per barrel of oil that travels down taps to fund maintenance on the Dalton Highway corridor. Okay. It has nothing to do with the pipeline per se, or the pipeline project, other than it's a tax structure that will help maintain the road that will be used for pipeline construction.
Through the chair, Senator Myers, thank you for the question. In the bill, we did not set any alternate parameters other than the appropriations authority. And so to the extent that there should be either a formula or a statement of intent or something like that on adding to current funding for the Dalton Highway, we haven't added that. So that is something that the committee might consider.
Okay, thank you.
There might be a process, Dean, for how contractors, maybe it's a competitive bid contract for maintenance on the road, and Glenfarne is not a road maintenance company. I doubt they would want to be responsible for maintenance of the road. I know they said they would fund it, but I don't think they want to be responsible for it. I think I've answered your question, Dean. The revenue from the 30-cent tax is saved to be spent. It is collected, and then to the extent that it's dedicated, it can't be dedicated. It can be designated to Dalton Highway maintenance, but it goes into a particular fund that is then used for Dalton Highway maintenance. That is a designated fund. I do not believe that it is a constitutional fund, constitutionally created fund. So subject to appropriation.
Okay, next question.
Further questions, Senator Dunbar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, just to Senator Myers' point, though, we have a constitutional prohibition on dedicated funds, right? So we do this pretty often. We try to raise money for things, but ultimately, every time we raise money, it could be supplanting other money unless you make a dedicated fund, which we're not going to do. So, well, we're trying with a constitutional amendment elsewhere.
Yeah.
So
Not transportation.
is that, I guess I'll ask Ms. Kawasaki, is that an accurate statement of what's going on here?
Through the chair, Senator Dunbar, that is accurate. You as the legislature has the appropriations authority, and the only constitutionally dedicated funds are in the Constitution, and that would preclude any forcible appropriations for certain projects or special interests through just regular lawmaking authority.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Subject to appropriation.
Senator Kawasaki.
Thank you.
Just like your dividend.
I guess this is just a comment in general that I like the idea that we're we're taking this maintenance surcharge. I think it's a simple way to do it, but it is tagging along the oil produced in the state, and the pipeline corridor for the oil pipeline is different than we're just talking Dalton is 400 miles to Fairbanks and then another 300 plus down the Richardson corridor. And I'm wondering, not representing the Valdez area like the senator across the way, but I mean, shouldn't they be entitled to some of that money? I feel like the cost causers should be the cost payers. So I agree with it, but I just want to make sure that it's, I guess it is subject to appropriation, but I don't know if there's any, I didn't have a question there, just mostly a statement about where the money goes and where the money comes from.
Sure. Because it's not, because we haven't created a dedicated fund here, it is intent, so to speak. And it does talk here about the Dalton Highway corridor. You're right, that's the Richardson. And that may not be a bad idea either. The Richardson can use some work as well. Yeah. Senator Myers.
Yeah, I was reminded of something. Madam Chair, you mentioned that Glenfarne said they wanted to pay for road maintenance, but you stated that they would be prohibited from doing so because it's a state maintained road and we're subject to some federal laws on that. So I was speaking to DOT last year about some issues on the Dalton and asking, kind of if we wanted to get the oil companies involved, how much that kind of what the legal ramifications of that were and stuff. They informed me that it is possible for that to happen. They just have to sign a memorandum of understanding with DOT, and it can. So, what would prevent Glenfarne from doing the same thing and doing the maintenance as they suggested they would do?
Senator Myers, they certainly could become a contractor. We have contractors that do the work for DOT. But you're right, they do sign on to the standards for construction of our roads, the standards for materials. Those standards include mixed designs for asphalt, concrete, cement, pardon me, and what kind of gravel, the particular grades of gravel go onto a road. I don't know that Glenfarne would be interested in becoming a road contractor, road construction contractor, but you're right. Possibly that could happen.
So to that point, Madam Chair, my understanding from what DOT was sharing with me is they weren't asking the oil companies to become a contractor. They were simply saying they had to sign an MOU. You're correct. They would have had to follow the state standards. And I think there was some issue about the state still being in charge of scheduling the maintenance, but the oil companies could do the work and pay for it themselves, and they wouldn't have to sign a formal contract with the state, just a memorandum of understanding. So we didn't go too far into it, but that was my understanding of it, and it sounds like Glenfarne could do the same thing, if I understand.
Thank you, Senator Myers. We won't speculate on that distant possibility, but interesting. Further questions on the Dalton Corridor Maintenance Fund? All right, seeing none. Are we to slide 7 then?
Dean, you say the fund's interest or the corpus? The language says only the interest is available, as that is all that is revenue from the 30 cents. I'm not sure I understand what you're saying. The new tax that they would be levying, 30 cents per barrel, the revenue generated from that tax would go into a separate fund. So it's a fund within the general fund, if you will. It is not constitutionally protected. So it doesn't matter what happens to that money, whether it's invested or whether it just sits there. It is subject to appropriation, meaning the legislature can spend it on the Dalton Highway, or it can spend it on education. It is just because the statute is changed here or added and says, hey, there's this fund created and the purpose is to fund maintenance on the Dalton Highway. The legislature can come in with the power of the appropriation pen and move the money to wherever the legislature wants it to go. Corpus investment, tax, all of it. Whatever revenue the state has, it can direct it wherever it needs to go. And yes, we're talking about gravel again on a gas tax bill.
For the record, Sonia Kawasaki, Senate Majority Legal Counsel. Madam Chair, on slide 7, the first bullet, we clarified that current petroleum property taxes, when they are applicable, are in place of taxes for an LNG export facility and a marine terminal. This is existing law for petroleum property tax covers certain elements of infrastructure, and the LNG export facility and marine terminal were simply added as conforming language to that provision.
It clarifies that current petroleum property taxes, current taxes, are in place of taxes for an LNG export facility and marine terminal. Okay, I think I'm gonna have to read the bill on that to get a better understanding.
Ms. Kawasaki, just again for the public, in case they don't have the PowerPoint in front of them, the subject is now changed to the proposed volumetric tax. The governor has suggested this type of tax rather than a PILT. That's a payment in lieu of taxes. This is a different form of that. So just clarification for the public. You might hear a lot of talk about a PILT. This is the format of that, the proposed volumetric tax. And so what you're saying here then is that this will be based on throughput. Ms. Kawasaki, could you explain
Sure,
how this
Madam
will
Chair.
be a volumetric tax?
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the prior CS, when the governor introduced his SB 280, it was introduced as a volumetric tax. With the Senate Resources prior CS, we had reformulated that structure of the volumetric tax quite a bit and kept the volumetric tax principle because it is easier to apply. There are less disputes over in terms of property tax would be over assessments. And so it was an easier model. And so we adopted the volumetric tax, or the alternative volumetric tax, AVT, as our base model, but we just restructured it so that basically there is a different tax rate applied to each of 3 components. The first one being the pipeline, the second one being the gas treatment plant located on the North Slope, and the final one being the export facility located in Nikiski. And the different tax rates in the bill right now that are preserved in this CS are 15 cents on the pipeline, 15 cents, per billion cubic feet on the pipeline, 15 cents on the gas treatment plant, and 25 cents on the LNG export facility.
Thank you, Ms. Kawasaki. And again, just for clarification, the volumetric tax was proposed by the governor in the original bill. I also want to welcome Representative Donna Mears, who has joined the meeting. Thank you for attending today.
Not at those rates. I believe those rates, if I understood her correctly, are greater than what the tax was that the governor proposed. Okay, Dean, I understand what you're saying, I think. Words matter, English matter, English language matters. When they say revenue from the 30-cent tax, that is the money generated by the 30-cent tax. It isn't the 30-cent tax is a sum of money, and then you invest that money and get more money from it. That's not what they're saying. Revenue is the money. Tax is the structure, if that makes sense.
Are there any questions about that? Senator Myers.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So we've explicitly stated a LNG plant or a marine terminal, but we didn't explicitly state the gas treatment plant in that section. Is there a particular reason?
Ms. Kawasaki?
Madam Chair, this was a request to, sorry, Senator Myers through the chair. This was a request to legislative legal to conform this area of law. And so
Conformant to what?
I will have to look into that for Senator Myers because I did know that the pipeline is already included in the list. And so adding the LNG plant and the marine terminal was drafted. And I will have to check into the gas treatment plant.
Thank you. Senator Dunbar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this might be mistaken, but my understanding from the way the 20 mil property tax works is that the assumption has always been that the gas treatment plant does fall within it. That is to say, if you look at the section before that, the exploration for production or pipeline transportation of gas or unrefined oil or property, I think it's either that or a different provision in the law that already captures the gas treatment facility in the 20 mils. And so we're exempting it. The question, I could be mistaken about that, but that was my understanding of how the law worked. My question is, and I guess I just want to highlight this, Ms. Kawasaki. When I hear marine terminal, I think Alyeska, I think a bunch of other ferry docks around the state. And so initially I was sort of concerned. I saw that, I was like, uh-oh, we'll be sweeping in a bunch of stuff here. But then if you go to page 30, section 42(8), they define marine terminal means terminal in those facilities required to receive liquefied natural gas from the boundary of the liquefied natural gas plant. So I guess the interpretation here, is it correct that this is pretty narrowly defined as a marine terminal just for LNG export because you're receiving it from the LNG treatment plant?
Ms. Kawasaki.
Thank you, Senator Dunbar, through the chair. That was the intent, and that was the intent. Thank you for asking. These definitions were borrowed from another area of law under AGDC that related to the Alaska liquefied natural gas project, and these two components were part of that definition. So the intent is, you're correct, to apply to export facilities.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Other questions? All right, let's go to the second bullet point on slide 7.
The second bullet point, Madam Chair, has to do with a qualified property. This is just a clarification that when the qualified property is subject to the new alternative volumetric tax, that if that qualified property has multiple owners, that every owner will pay in proportion to their ownership share. I would consider that a technical or clarification change.
Thank you. See no questions. The third bullet point.
The third change is a technical change to ensure that inflation adjustments to the alternative volumetric tax rates begin 10 years after commencement of commercial operations when based on each of the each of the 3 components coming online separately experiencing the commencement of operations.
Very good. I see.
So that's a change from the governor's bill. His bill had a what was it, 10 cents or 10%? No, it was 10 cents, 1%. I can't remember. It's been a long time. But it wasn't at the rate of inflation. No, it was 1%. I had it right. It was 1%. And now they'll have the rate of inflation, which is, nominally or understood to be 2.5% over a long term. So doubling and then some. What was in the governor's provision?
No questions. So to the last bullet point.
Yes, Madam Chair. The last bullet point clarifies that natural gas consumed as fuel for operations for the LNG facility itself, including, now this was the change to under the bill, the CS, is that if it's used for refrigeration purposes, it's also not considered throughput for the purposes of taxing under the AVT.
Thank you. We also included in that gas that's re-injected at up on the slope, as well as not being taxable as natural gas produced. Correct?
Madam Chair, I believe that's in a different section, but yes, that we do not consider that as gas that will be produced and taxed as under the production tax prevailing value principles, unless the Department of Revenue just performs that requirement on its own, because I've heard from testimony that Department of Revenue sometimes does apply tax to for other purposes than we were trying to address with the bill.
Right. But it was not our intent that gas reinjected would be mandatorily taxed. And so just to clarify that, again, we heard from the industry significant concern about that.
Craig, you have a point that I wanted to address. You say they're not getting the best legal advice. That may be true. Excuse me. It may be true that the Senate Majority Legal Counsel is not the best possible gas tax attorney. Do you expect that the state of Alaska Senate Majority Office, chaired by or led by Chair Giesel, Senator Giesel, is going to be able to attract good oil and gas attorney talent for what the legislature is going to pay? It's kind of an open-ended question because the answer, it's obviously no. I mean, an oil and gas attorney is going to work for an oil and gas company. If they're worth their salt, if they can't get a job with the gas company, then they're going to get elected to the legislature or they're going to work for the legislature, right? I mean, that's the reality. So this is another one of those situations where you get what you pay for. You go to war with the people you have, not the people you want. And you got to figure out how to make it work. Takes time, takes iteration, because maybe you don't get it right. Maybe you got to ask lots of questions until you figure it out. Do more research. I mean, those are all things that how you would have to qualify or mitigate the fact that you don't have top tier talent. I mean, this is the Alaska legislature. Of course, you're not going to get top tier talent to come work for the legislature. I mean, that's hard to do. There's got to be other reasons for why you do that. I can think of I think of Dan Stickle as being top tier talent. I hired staff that was top tier talent, right? There are other reasons other than money for why those people are serving. I'm not sure you're going to get top tier natural gas attorney talent. Don't mean to insult any oil and gas attorneys or any staff members, but let's be honest, all right?
Good. Any questions on these bullet points then on slide 7? All right. Seeing none, we'll go to slide 8.
Madam Chair, slide 8 is our next to the last slide. And the first bullet just addresses the repealer's applicability and transition and retroactivity sections. And they are just conforming to the new changes of the CS. One of two retroactive sections that we had originally in the first CS had to do with the gas lease expenditures, and that retroactivity section has been removed because we no longer will attempt to decouple gas and oil lease expenditures in this version of the CS.
Very good. I don't see any questions. And then the last bullet point, conditional effect.
Yes, the conditional effect just needed to receive some clarity on when the new alternative volumetric tax would expire and revert to existing property tax structure. And that was if the gas pipeline was not begun construction on January 1st of 2028, or this is the second clause that would revert the AVT back to regular property tax, was if that one major component of the liquefied natural gas project wasn't complete by January 1 of 2032.
Very good. And what is completed? How is that defined?
Madam Chair, in this case, completed means that the commercial operations have begun.
Thank you. Any questions on that? Anything on slide 8? Very good. That concludes the changes.
Okay. Thank goodness. That was long. That was painful. And some of that was unnecessary. But at least from a can't have it all your way perspective, Senator Giesel and Senator Wielechowski found out that they couldn't have it their way. Maybe they put the original CS together, knowing full well that they're not going to have their way. They just wanted to make their point. They wanted to stir the pot. Maybe they sure made a valiant effort at defending why they wanted to do what they wanted to do. Okay, but in the interest of taking a bad CS and making it a better CS, we have accomplished that. The old CS was garbage, and this is just kind of slightly smelly. I don't know how to qualify it. I'm going to have to go read the CS and make sure that I fully understand everything that was said here, and I'm planning to do that. But it appears that much of what was detestable has been removed. So, again, you've got a defined benefits bill and you've got a pipeline tax bill. Governor Dunleavy wants a pipeline tax bill. He already has the defined benefits bill. The people who have the pipeline tax bill want the defined benefits bill. So there is a quid pro quo going on right now. You give me my tax bill, I'll give you defined benefits. From my understanding, it's not illegal. If Senator Giesel or Governor Dunleavy were receiving personal kickbacks, they were personally getting something for a quid pro quo, then that would be illegal. But because this is in the legislative purview, my understanding and my research tells me it's not illegal. It is fully within the realm of politics, at least in the state of Alaska, that you can do this. Does it mean it's good governance? Probably not. Probably many arguments for why the tax bill should stand on its own and the defined benefits bill should stand on its own, right? Again, this is what you get when you elect a mixed government. You think you're getting better government? Well, now you're going to get a bill on defined benefits that one side wants, and you get a tax bill that the other side kind of a tax bill that the other side wants. It's not exactly his bill anymore. It'll be close, but it won't be exact. So that's what you're going to get. You get a new defined benefits, a new debt added to the state. And don't forget, debt to or increased taxes to your local municipalities. That is the thing that nobody's talking about. But mark my words, as early as next year, as early as this decade, at some point in time, we're going to have a perfect storm of low returns and high inflation, or employees that are living longer than they should. That sounds bad. Employees living longer than the actuarial said that they were going to live. Let's put it that way. Or you're going to have employees that get paid more than what the actuarial or the formula that establishes the defined benefits expects for employees to be paid. And that affects what they're going to earn and their size of their pension, including overtime. An assumption is made at how much overtime. If you increase the amount of overtime, you're increasing the amount of pay, and you're increasing the defined benefit when they retire. Okay, so all of those things, when they change and the fund comes below 90% funded, then the ARM board is going to increase the employer contribution in order to keep that 90% funded. That's what they're supposed to do. Well, that means school districts and boroughs who have employees that opt into this defined benefit system will have to pay more in their budgets for those employees' benefits. They will have no choice. No choice. That budgets will go up because of that. At a time when your economy may be tanking, it may be hurting because you see investments go down, right? Or inflation coming up. Those times are when things are hurting the most. Your local budgets are going to cost more. At the state level, you're not going to feel the pinch at all because it's just going to take it out of your dividend, right? And you don't need that, so we'll just take more out of that, right? That's the short answer there. Doesn't really hurt you in the sense that you're paying a tax for it, right? That's why it's so easy to do. At the local level, and this is a thing, this provision, this automatic escalator provision wasn't in the original bill. There was such an argument for against defined benefits as, hey, we've got $7 billion in debt already. A new tier is going to increase that in the future. And the proponents of the bill said, okay, well, we'll prevent that from happening by putting this automatic escalator. If we drop below 90% funded, that target, then we'll just pay more. We'll pay more and we'll avoid the debt problem in the future. Okay. Well, that's fine for the legislature who are saying, okay, well, we'll just pay more. But who pays more? Who pays the bill? Well, at the state level, it's the state budget that pays the bill, right? So that's oil companies and permanent fund earnings. But at the municipality, at the local level, which you're not having a conversation at the legislature about, they're the ones that end up paying more. So property owners who will pay a property tax, you're the one that's going to have to pay more. A sales tax increase to pay more. Those are the things that are the natural consequence of a defined benefits bill written the way that it is being adopted. So you can thank your legislators when they come home for inevitably raising your local taxes with a new pension. You can thank them. You elected them. All right. That's it for the show. Thanks for participating tonight. Willie Keppel says, got the last word here. The whole goal is to tax the max without putting it in the corpus investment. They're going to find a way into that corpus of that permanent fund. Mark my words. All right, guys. We will see you tomorrow night. And hopefully when I go to turn on the show, my computer won't die. So we'll start on time. 7 p.m. tomorrow night. Have a good night.